Marcella. Keep going. Dave, do you mind seeing if you could spot Maricela? Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the Global Regional Road Safety Observatory's dialogue on powered two-wheeler safety. Really wonderful to have you all back today, and again to those of us joining online. In case there's someone new there today, my name is Blaise Murfitt from Global Road Safety Partnership and also supporting the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory, and really delighted to be back with you for this day 2 of this event after a very productive day yesterday. I'd like to first observe all protocols following from yesterday, and welcome back our dignitaries, and of course, also all of our participants, a warm welcome back. I hope you had a good rest. And for those of you online, again, a warm welcome back to this first session for today. Just to remind people about some of the housekeeping elements, so you can see there, I hope, for those joining on Zoom, please do remember at any time to put questions or comments in the chat. The earlier you can do this in the session, the better. Just means that we can ensure to get those questions in time for our Q&A. So the moment it comes to mind, please do type in. Also remember, we do have Russian translation available both here in the room and also online. For those online, please just select the Russian translation icon. And for those here, please use the blue covered tables at the back of the room. Of course, for those online, remember to mute your microphones. We will, though, invite you back to join us, at least with your face, during the Q&A sessions today as well. So I'll let you know when that happens. And again, we just really do strongly welcome and would welcome your comments and questions coming in. In fact, I can see there one of our participants, Edouard Patrick, saying good morning. Good morning to you and everyone who is joining us online. And again, to those who are here in the room. Just a few other housekeeping for those here. Thank you, Mark. So a reminder again to please keep your phones on silent. Don't take off your face masks unless you're up here speaking. And to remember to follow social distancing. Again, we'll have 2 Q&A sessions during our presentation sessions today. So welcome any questions in the same format that we had yesterday. And of course, just remember that we'll have our Secretariat team here to support you if required for anything. I think by now you know who they are, so please do look out for them. We will again be having snacks in our breaks just outside, and lunch looks like it will be in the same place as yesterday. Yes, I'm getting a nod. So in the same place as yesterday for those of us in person. I think that is all the housekeeping that I should mention for today. But just again to remind you that this dialogue on powered two-wheeler safety is being brought to you by the Global Regional Road Safety Observatories, along with the support of those many organisations that are listed on the screen for all of you. I'm not going to repeat them all today, but just again an acknowledgement of the fantastic support, collaboration and partnership that has been put together to put on this event and to ensure that we're really trying to put more focus on this issue of powered two-wheeler safety. Okay, so then the last, I think, of my reminders is that for those, for all participants, you might recall we shared with you the draft statement that will be released following this event and welcomed your comment. I hope you've seen the QR code there. Just a reminder, if you do have any comments that you would like to add, please do so by lunchtime today, Manila time. I think that's all that I need to mention in terms of housekeeping, but again, just a warm welcome back to everyone who is online and in person. Again, a reminder about the Russian translation, and to all our speakers to remember to speak at a kind pace for our translators, please. Okay, so then let's get into our first of the sessions today, which is focusing on redesigning infrastructure for powered two-wheeler safety. You can see already we have our fantastic panel up with us, and I'm going to introduce them all at once so we can just get straight into their presentations. A reminder, we will have Q&A at the end of this session, so keep some questions in mind, or for those online, please just put it straight into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So the first of our speakers in this session focusing on redesigning infrastructure will be Greg Smith, who's the Managing Director at the International Road Assessment Program, where he leads Strategic Projects Division of IRAP, which is a charity dedicated to preventing serious road crashes, which are the leading cause of death for young people worldwide. Greg works closely with governments, multilateral development banks, non-governmental organisations and the industry on road infrastructure safety policy and projects globally. including here in the Asia Pacific, but also in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin American regions. Warm welcome to you, Greg. The second of our speakers will be Johan Strandroth, who's a Senior Advisor, Road Safety, Target Management and Strategy Development. Johan is a civil engineer with a master's and PhD in machine and vehicle safety systems. He is the principal at Strandroth Inc. and a senior advisor in road safety target management and strategy development with specialist capabilities in crash data modeling and in-depth crash investigation. During his time in the Swedish Transport Administration, Johan developed methodologies that now are the foundation of the analytical framework and target management system for Sweden's Vision Zero strategy. Representing the Swedish government, Johan has advised many other countries and jurisdictions in road safety strategy and target management, including the European Commission, the United States, and in Australasia. And over the past years, he has provided consulting services as a researcher and road safety advisor to companies and governments in Sweden, the Middle East, New South Wales, Victoria, New Zealand, and countries in Southeast Asia through the Global Road Safety Partnership and the Asian Development Bank. Warm welcome back to you, Johan. After that, we'll be hearing from Shane Turner, who is the Technical Director for Road Safety at ABLI. Shane is an adjunct senior fellow at the University of Canterbury, where he teaches at undergraduate and graduate levels in road safety. He is also an experienced researcher, having completed over 20 projects for the New Zealand Transport Agency and Austroads, and having written over 70 conference and journal papers. He is active internationally through IRAP and the Global Technical Committee and the United States Transport Research Board. He has also delivered presentations at universities and conferences across the US and Australia. Through these forums, he is exposed to best practice in road safety globally and uses this experience and his international contacts to bring best practice to his consulting work. He is motivated by Vision Zero and the safe system approach, especially in terms of improving safety for vulnerable road users. And he is of the view, which I'm sure he'll share with us, that achieving Vision Zero for vulnerable road users requires a combination of infrastructure improvements, speed management, and vehicle technology. Warm welcome to you, Shane. Following Shane will be Eduardo Pompeo, who's a Senior Program Manager for the Global Designing Cities Initiative, which he joined as a Program Manager in 2017 to contribute to their efforts in promoting safe, equitable, and sustainable cities through better street design. As part of the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative for Global Road Safety, he provides technical assistance to multiple cities in South America in applying design principles from the Global Street Design Guide. And prior to joining GDCI, he worked at SP Urbanismo, an agency within the São Paulo city government in Brazil, where he was involved in projects and programs related to urban mobility and public spaces. Warm welcome to you, Edu. And then also we'll hear today from Maricela Ponce de Leon Valdez, who's a transport specialist with the World Bank Global Road Safety Facility and working to support the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative for Global Road Safety, where she serves as the focal point for Asia. Most recently, she served as the road safety focal point for the Transport Division of the Inter-American Development Bank, or IDB. She holds a master's degree in public health from the University of Liverpool and a bachelor's degree in international relations from the Technological and Higher Education Institute of Monterrey in Mexico. Previously, she served as road safety injury and violence prevention consultant for WHO in the Western Pacific Regional Office here in the Philippines, and for PAHO in its Mexican country office. And prior to this, she served as the International Relations Department of the Technical Secretariat of the National Council for Accident Prevention of Mexico. Maricela, warm welcome to you. So with that, let's get into this first session focusing on redesigning infrastructure. As I mentioned to you, please think of any questions or comments, both online or in person, and we'll have time to get to those through the session. But with that, let us join in welcoming Greg Smith. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Blaise, and good morning, everyone. Thank you again for coming to this event. I realise I need to update my photo to be a bit more honest about my hair provision at the moment, so I'll do that. So for those who are not familiar, I'm from IRAP, which is the International Road Assessment Program. We're a charity and our focus is on helping countries, road operators improve the safety of the infrastructure of their roads for existing roads and road designs. The key way that we do that is through the creation of tools that enable you to star rate roads for safety. And so we take a look at the infrastructure along a road or along a design, measure it, and then produce scores. The scores are the star ratings. So 1 star is the highest risk and 5 star is the lowest risk. And really importantly, there's separate star ratings for different road user types. So a separate star rating for vehicle occupants, separate star rating for motorcyclists, pedestrians, and bicyclists. The assessments using the tools have now been done in more than 100 countries across different sample sizes of networks by partners all around the country, all around the world. That includes, for example, the ADB supporting assessments in Pakistan, or the Global Road Safety Facility supporting assessments here in the Philippines. What I want to do now is share with you some of the data that's being compiled globally to help give you a sense of where we're at in terms of infrastructure design and provision in the sense that it affects motorcyclists. So I'm going to do something radical right now and try to share my screen. We've only got one. Okay, hang on, I'll share my screen. Hopefully we're going to see that. Brilliant, brilliant. Okay. So this is a temporary report that we've created just for this conference, and it exposes the data in the global data set of the IRAP assessments. This website is available for you right now, and hopefully you can access it to help support your discussions during the dialogue sessions a little later. The website address is www.irap.org/MC dialogue. So MC dialogue after the IRAP address. So you can jump on there when you're ready. Hopefully you won't do that while the speakers are talking, but you can take a look for yourself. But what I want to do is talk you through some of the key results and key findings. So what you can see on the left is a series of filters that you can use, whether it's the WHO region, country, area type, or powered two-wheeler flow. At the bottom of that, on the left-hand side, you can see there's data in there from 78 countries, totaling up to 463,000 kilometers of roads. So it's a really large data set of factors that we know influence the risk for motorcyclists. It's certainly the biggest data set in the world on infrastructure safety. I should just say that the results here might not be totally representative of an entire country's roads because the samples vary quite a bit, but it does give you this really valuable insight into the condition of the roads. On the right-hand side, the little dials, these are all road attributes that we know from evidence, some published evidence. We know that these affect the risk of a motorcyclist being killed or seriously injured when they're using a road. So the very first dial, it says what length is 3 stars plus. So that's the 24% up in the left-hand side. What that means is across those 460,000 kilometers of roads, just 24% of the roads rate 3 stars or better for motorcycles, i.e. the rest is 1 star or 2 star in the highest categories. We set the next dial to say which percentage has a speed limit of 60 kilometers an hour or less, just as a sort of a threshold indicator to give you a sense of where the speed limits are at. So about a third of the roads have a speed limit of less than 60 kilometers an hour. But really importantly, that next dial says what percentage of the roads have traffic traveling at or below the speed limit. So this is a critically important one. Only 43% of the roads in that data set are places where the traffic typically travels at the speed limit. The rest of it, they're traveling faster than the speed limit. So this has a huge impact in terms of the safety of the roads and the star ratings. So if I was to say to you immediately, what could we do right now to improve the safety of the roads? Make sure that people travel at the speed limit or below. It's something that's already built into the system. It's just not being enforced well enough. And this is not just the motorcyclists traveling faster than the speed limit, it's other vehicles as well. And in fact, sometimes that's more important than focusing on the motorcyclists. We've got many other factors, and we know each one of these dials, if you're able in your country to just twist it a little bit towards the 100%, you don't have to get to 100%. In many of these dials, if you're able to lift it by just a few percent, translates into saved lives. What this really shows is that every country has many opportunities to twist these dials, and you can choose which one you want to do, choose which one is going to suit you best. They all have a positive effect, give or take, on safety. So on the infrastructure, the intersections, for example, you can see there's one called lighting at intersection. So it's the one right below the 3 stars. 49% of intersections have lighting, so about half, which is great, fantastic. What if we lifted that to 60% globally? What sort of impact would that have in terms of safety, not just for motorcyclists, but for regular vehicle drivers, for pedestrians as well? It's one of those infrastructure improvements that has multiple benefits. It connects very well into the topics, for example, of gender equity and safety. We know that women often say they're reluctant to walk around the streets, especially at night, because they're dark. So if we're able to lift that dial, adjust that dial a little to get more intersections with street lighting, it would improve motorcycle safety significantly and have flow-on effects in other places as well. And getting the intersection quality up as well. So only about half of the intersections, 54%, are in good quality, with good line marking, good signs, and good visibility. Through basic maintenance, could we systematically make sure that all our intersections are good quality? This isn't any radical new idea. It's doing the things that we know we need to be doing, but doing it systematically and doing it well and doing it consistently. That has a significant impact as well. Motorcycle lanes, which is one of the things that came through in the green book that Nan from the World Health Organization launched yesterday. Motorcycle lanes was identified as being a critically important piece of infrastructure. And at the moment, the dial says 0%. It's not actually 0, it's less than 1%. And I'm going to show you some places where they exist. In the right circumstances, in the right design, they save lives. And like Nan said, actually, we have an opportunity to rethink how we use space on many of our roads. In places like Malaysia, Vietnam, and increasingly in cities in Africa and Latin America, thinking about the provision of motorcycles as the major road user and the vehicles as the other road user is something that I think we need to really sort of aggressively get onto. But we know that if you could lift the dial a little on that motorcycle lane provision, you're going to save lives. It's not a radical idea. It's been tried many times and works many times. So many situations where we can improve safety through dividing the roads, so only 28% of the roads are divided. We know on undivided roads, head-on crashes occur with consistency. They're very predictable. But undivided roads, they help to reduce that risk and protect every road user, not just the motorcyclist. So I also want to take the chance just to drill into these results a little bit. So this little filter down here, it gives you the chance to say, show me just the roads with motorcycle flow that's less than 10% of total traffic. So less than 1 in 10 vehicles are a motorcycle, or more than 1 in 10. So we said, okay, let's say we look at roads with more than 10% flow. So these ones with we would consider starting to get into the category of high motorcycle flow roads. And we know in some countries the percentage is much higher than that. Sometimes it's 70, 80, 90 or more percent. The super interesting thing I think here is the star rating for motorcycles on roads with lots of motorcycles is no better than average. To me, that's saying we're not doing anything specifically on the roads that carry majority or very large flows of motorcycles to help the motorcycles be safe. They're basically no different than any other road. There is some little difference. One is on the speed. You can see that the speeds are slightly lower, so there's a higher percentage of roads classed 60 kilometers an hour or less, and actually there's slightly better compliance on the roads than average where there's high motorcycle flows. But for every other dial that you can see there, the percentage is less than the average. There's less intersections with lighting on those roads. There's less intersections that are good quality on those roads. There's less sections that are divided. There's less sections with paved shoulder. So although the speeds are slightly lower, which is a fantastic thing, the infrastructure provision is worse than average, which is completely sort of contra to what you would expect. These are roads that are carrying big volumes of motorcycles. You would expect the infrastructure to be designed in a way that compensates for that and protects motorcyclists, but that's not happening. We have a huge opportunity just to lift these dials a little on all of these features, whether you want to focus on paved shoulder or lighting, intersection quality. Doing that systematically across networks can have an enormous impact. Let me show you, I think one of the very interesting case studies is when we look at the roads in, let's say, urban areas. I'm going to pick out Vietnam, and thank you in advance for friends in Vietnam for being the guinea pig here. These are roads that are largely, you can see there's about 1,000 kilometers of roads in this sample. These are roads that are largely in Ho Chi Minh City. And remember, this is not a random sample of roads in the city. They're very specific roads that we've looked at based on projects. So they're not necessarily fully representative of what it's really like in the whole of Ho Chi Minh City. But nonetheless, they give you this interesting insight. 70% of the roads we looked at are 3 stars or better. Way better than average, much better. And you would expect that. Vietnam manages very large flows of motorcyclists, and they've been doing that for a long time. You wouldn't say it's perfect yet, but there's a lot to learn and a lot to like about what's happening there. 82% of those roads are 60 kilometers an hour or less in terms of speed zone. So managing speed obviously has had big impact. Really high compliance came through in that. So most traffic is traveling at or below the speed limit. Massively important to the safety performance of the road. But then you can also see the motorcycle lane category. So that's the one right in the middle of the chart, is sitting at 19%. 1 in 5 kilometers of the roads we assess have some sort of specific motorcycle facility, whether it's a service road that's separated from the faster moving traffic or a motorcycle lane with a safety barrier. They use maybe 4 different sorts of layouts. But these are all things that ensure that the motorcyclists don't interact very often with the faster moving heavy traffic. And like I said, many of these roads are some of the larger sort of arterial roads where large traffic flows are being handled. But those two things really, the speed and the motorcycle lane provision, translates to very high percentage that's 3 stars or better, and we think translates into significant reductions in risk. But again, there's so many opportunities for improvement. Channelization at intersections, so basically making the intersections smaller, like the space that people can drive through the intersection a little smaller, so that the traffic is better sort of channeled into controlled spaces. Intersection lighting, again, these are simple things that systematically done through the city could make a really significant impact as well. So I guess what I would say is take a look at this data, see if there's some data for your country, and use it to inform your understanding about the situation that we're managing, and think about what steps we might take systematically in the future to improve motorcycle safety in your country. One other point that I just really want to make also is increasingly we're getting an understanding of where the majority of traffic in a country flows. So you might know that in the UN Road Safety Performance Targets, target number 4 talks about ensuring that the majority of traffic in a country, 75% of travel or more, is happening on roads that are designed well for safety or achieving a 3-star rating or better. Where are those 75% of travel occurring? We're increasingly getting to know that. Your road authorities probably know that. Your national road authority know how many vehicles are traveling on the national network. You can figure out where the majority of travel is happening. From the work that we've done with AI analysis in Thailand and Vietnam, for example, we know that about 10% of the roads account for about 75% of travel. So we're not saying you need to improve every single road to achieve these. Focus in on the roads where most travel happens. It becomes a very manageable task. In the whole nation of Vietnam, you might be talking about less than 20,000 kilometers of roads out of hundreds of thousands of kilometer road national network, entire network. So turning these dials on the roads where flows are really high is how we can make really large improvements to the safety of the roads. So yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully this is useful for you, and I'll hand over now to Johan Strandroth, who is going to talk a little about the human impact and understanding the mechanisms of crashes for motorcyclists.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. And let's see if we can bring up my presentation, and I'll get on right away. Excellent. Thank you. So the topic of my presentation is human impact and what in-depth analysis of crashes can tell us. So the focus is really try to understand how can in-depth analysis of crashes help us in developing and implementing a safe system for motorcyclists. Next slide, please. And I want to do that by going through these aspects. So we're going to look at first principle crash avoidance and injury mitigation, counterfactual analysis, and some local validations of safe system boundaries and end states. I guess the first thing that we want to look at when it comes to crash investigation is to sort of acknowledge that in-depth analysis of crashes could help us to understand crashes a bit better by putting them into a sequence of events, which is quite common in injury research, where you try to acknowledge that a crash is a series of events with multiple causation factors and multiple impacts, and thereby those multiple causation factors, you also have multiple reasons for why people getting into a crash in the first place, and why in the event of a crash that crash actually leads to a serious outcome. And because of those different and many different reasons for why a crash happened and a fatality happened or a serious injury happens, we also have many different ways to actually prevent the crash from happening in the first place, which would be crash avoidance, where we need to understand crash mechanisms. And that's the left-hand side of this slide, where we have the sequence of going from normal driving, and something happens, we deviate from normal driving and comes to an emergency situation or a critical situation. And there are things, we can discuss how much there are for motorcyclists, but there are things that would help us to bring our vehicle back to normal driving, so that in that critical situation, I get assisted, or me as a driver acts in a way that I actually get away from that critical situation, back to normal driving and continue my driving. Or if the crash is unavoidable, I'm involved in a crash, there's a stage of crash mitigation where we acknowledge that, yep, crash is unavoidable, but there is a difference of just a property damage only or a minor injury to all the way to a serious injury and a fatal injury. And that is not by coincidence that you end up as a minor injury, as a fatal injury. That has to do with energy management. And the way that we deal with that is crash mitigation, that we can actually try to make sure that the system protects us as human as good as possible. So in terms of this, if we start with crash mitigation and look at the system as a whole, next slide, please. We've been pretty good, or at least pretty quick, at blaming the road user and looking at the crash and looking to see at what are the contributing factors in this crash. If we can go to the next slide. To say that the absolute majority of crashes actually to do with the road user. So driver error would be the main driver and reason for why a crash happened. See if we can go to the next slide. Excellent. Thank you. And this is quite common picture where we try to understand systematically what happens in the crash, what are the contributing factors. We say that in 95% of all injuries or all crashes, the driver is a contributing factor. And then there's some road issues and there's some vehicle issues. Now with the safe system approach or Vision Zero, that started to change quite a bit where we say that, yeah, the road user definitely has an important part of the safe system. But when it comes to the ultimate responsibility for that crash mitigation principles and make sure that the system is forgiving when the people make mistakes, that's where we as system designer and infrastructure designer needs to step in and make sure that that system is forgiving. So that ended up in a different way of actually looking at crashes, if we can take the next slide, where we say that if we look in this picture, we can see all motorcycle crashes in Sweden happening in a few years. We have 40 per year fatalities. And in this case, we, instead of looking at the driver, the road, we say, what are the reasons for we couldn't be able to manage the energy in this crash so that it ended up in a fatal crash? And the classification is either excessive force, where we say that the combination of the road design and speed managers and vehicle safety was not enough to protect the occupant. And then we have the 18% where we have outside system boundaries, where we can see that there's such an excessive violations by the rider in this case. So it doesn't really matter what we do with the system because it's just impossible with the tools that we have to save this rider. And then we have 1% with excessive risk, lack of protective gear. So this tells us something that the system needs to redesign, because if every motorcycle rider in Sweden were to comply with all regulations, speed limits, helmet wear, everything, we'll still have 64% of fatalities. And that's a pretty sort of awakening thing where we say that, yeah, rider behavior is a very important factor, but really the majority and the significant majority of crashes is depending on us as system designer haven't been able to adapt the system to the needs of power two-wheeler riders. So it really speaks to us to redesign the system, that we cannot drop just power two-wheelers in the current system and expect it to be safe. We need to redesign the system and redesign infrastructure to adapt to that. So how do we need to adapt it, and how do we know how to adapt it? Well, that's where in-depth crash investigation and in-depth analysis can help us a bit more. Next slide, please. To understand human biomechanical tolerance. So these curves in front of us are risk curves, or what we would call curves that help us understand the correlation between speed and the risk of an injury or a risk of a fatality. So the risk of a minor injury would be represented by the graphs to the left, and the risk for a fatality would be to the right. And if we click on the next slide, if we not perfectly, but at least acceptably accept the risk of 10% serious injury or fatality, we can follow this red line here and see on motorcyclists, which would be represented by the blue graph, that around between 30 kilometers per hour and 50 kilometers per hour, that's where the current system limitations is at the moment. So with a helmeted rider in Sweden, we are able to survive most crashes if they don't happen above 50, and avoid serious injuries if they don't happen above 30. So that's pretty much where our limit is at the moment. And if we want to change that, of course, we can do that in a few different ways. So if we take the next slide and we look at that chain of event again, where we went from normal driving to crash avoidance and a crash happen. Next slide, please. Thank you. We can put another sort of layer on top of this and say, if the crash is acceptable at 50 kilometers per hour with today's motorcyclists and today's infrastructure, we can have a travel speed at 50. But if we want to go above that, then we need to work either better with crash avoidance, or we need to work with better crash mitigation or protective gear in a way that we can handle the crash better, which of course is challenging. But there are ways to do that. If we take the next slide, please. And the next thing, of course, is to look not only on crash mitigation then, but actually crash avoidance as well. And that's a few question marks there, because it's just been lack of understanding on how to work with crash avoidance when it comes to motorcycle safety if we look at infrastructure and vehicles. But that is changing a bit, and we can see over at least the last decade that there's a lot of technology being in the development phase and also some that's been implemented, and ABS is one of those perfect examples where we can see that it's really acting in the crash avoidance phase, making sure that instability in braking is sort of avoided and thereby avoiding the crash. And what we want to know, of course, is that what kind of impact would this happen or have on fatalities and injuries? And this is where we get into counterfactual analysis, which is a tool to help us understand the effect of different types of treatments, because that's really what we need to know. If we're getting into a strategy development phase or an action plan and we want to do a set of measures for motorcyclists to improve safety, we want to understand, if I do this, what the impact of that, what is the number of saved lives I can get from that, and the number of prevented serious injuries. So if we take the next slide, that was one of the examples that happened when I was part of authoring the first evaluation of ABS in Europe. And that's where we used first counterfactual analysis to understand what is a system actually, or a treatment actually targeting? What is it trying to do? And if we look at ABS, for example, on the left-hand side, the previous slide. That one, thank you. The first thing is to understand, what does ABS do? Well, it acts under braking. So you start to make up a decision tree and look at all your fatalities and say, how many of these fatalities actually have braking involved? And if there's a no, of course, ABS would have no effect. But if there is a braking, then ABS could potentially help. And then you sort of continue on that decision tree and make more advanced boundary conditions around a certain system. And you end up, in this case, the fact that 2/3 of all fatal crashes with motorcycles had braking involved, and also instability in braking, which means that you get an idea of how huge the effect could be in a system like this. But that's only one example, and that's then spurred the hypothesis to a statistical study that then evaluated real-life benefit to be around 50% for severe and fatal injuries. So that's only one system, but that could be done to several systems. So if we take the next slide, we can see that this is the result of that counterfactual analysis being done on several treatments in a country like Sweden. See if we can get to the next slide. Exactly. So the blue bars here represent the number of saved lives for different type of vehicle safety measures. The green ones would be different types of infrastructure measures, and the yellow ones would be different types of road user behavior treatments or measures. And it's not a full-blown evaluation where we wait 10 years for crash data and then sort of see real-life benefits. But what it is a what-if scenario to say, we know that there's a certain system that acts on this type of crashes. What if we would do something about that? What if we would introduce this treatment? How far would that take us? What's the individual benefit of doing things? And that's an important tool when we try to prioritize and try to choose, in my country, what the specific benefits. And that's an important factor. This is Sweden, and this will, of course, be quite different in other parts of the world. Now, the laws of physics are the same. We as humans, what we tolerate in biomechanical forces, that's the same. But the number of target population crashes differs from different regions of the world. And that's why this needs to be done and repeated in different parts of the world. Now, if you choose an action plan or a program, of course, you need to prioritize. So maybe next step, if you take the next slide, is an example of how you choose some of those things to say, here are my most important key elements in my action plan to reduce a target or to reduce the number of fatalities and injuries to a specific target. So here's that key focus areas translated into performance indicators where there's a current state. Here is where we are at the moment. Here is where we need to be in the future, the target, and not only target in terms of injuries and fatalities, but also in targets, where do I need to be with this performance indicator? And then I can calculate it through my analysis, the effect of that in terms of number of saved lives, and I can add that and account for double counting so that I actually get a combined effect of all this treatment from a holistic perspective, that I can get an understanding how close that will take me to the target. So in that sense, it's a more holistic, strategic response to the whole problem, where I want to make sure that I have different types of elements and different types of the pillars in my response. If I can provoke a bit, we probably want to be a bit more visionary than that, and I'm going to use my last slides to that to just say that this is very important when we look at interim targets, with the recommendation from OECD and WHO and others for the target to be ambitious, but also empirically derived and reasonable, so that I actually have an evidence base to be able to achieve that target. But if we're looking forward and say, how would actually an end state look? What does a system look where it has no fatalities or injuries for motorcyclists? And do we have the tools today to actually take us close to that? How would that look like? And can I validate in any way with in-depth analysis of crashes? So if we take the next slide, this was an exercise that was done in Sweden where we just say, a conceptual safe system for motorcycles, how would that look like? The motorcycle will probably have airbag. Don't get your attention on the three-wheel, that's an alternative, it doesn't have to be. It's pretty ugly, but but you have your airbags, you have your alcohol interlock, you have your speed limiter, you have all those things which may not be readily available for motorcyclists, but it is existing technologies. Motorcycle-friendly barriers, motorcycle-friendly infrastructure, other vehicles on the road that actually are motorcycle-friendly in the sense that it detects them and avoids them, etc. What would that do? So on a baseline of 40 fatalities per year in Sweden, what we then estimated was that we would still have 5 fatalities if all this was implemented. So that's a 90% reduction with things that are maybe not, again, relatively available and implementable, but still it's not super rocket science and it's not flying cars. So is it zero? No, it's not zero, but it's a very good pathway sort of to get there, and it's pretty close. So that's one way of looking at it, to be able to then, through in-depth analysis, validate how close to zero we can come, given that we combine more visionary treatments. Finally, if we go to the next slide, I just want to acknowledge that this, of course, differs in different parts of the world. This exercise is not something that you do in Sweden or Singapore or Vietnam, and then it's representative for all over the world. No, because we drive different motorcycles, and I don't need to mention this because it's sort of mentioned by previous speakers yesterday, that we do have different types of motorcyclists. I think next slide, please. We have different road users and different users of motorcyclists, and that means that we need to do this type of analysis in the local context to make sure that the strategic response that we have and the idea of the safe system is actually adapted to the mobility needs of powered two-wheelers in that specific regions of the world. So the last slide will be my recommendations would actually be then to develop evidence-based safe system and states for motorcyclists, taking regional mobility needs into account and validate that, and acknowledging the use and the benefits of in-depth crash analysis during that process. Thank you very much. And by that, I'm going to leave over to Shane Turner at ABLI, who will talk about research and evaluation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Johan. So, as I said, my name's Shane Turner. I'm a road safety specialist based in New Zealand, but for the last 2 years, I've been working with Binamarga, which are the National Highway Agency in Indonesia, to look at how they can improve safety across their national network. And this has involved black spot analysis and coming up with treatments for black spots. So part of that, we've been doing quite a lot of, looking at a lot of the literature on the effectiveness of various types of infrastructure on road safety and how we can apply that to black spots. So that's why the subject of my talk is really looking at those knowledge gaps in terms of the effectiveness of those different types of treatments. Next slide. So we've already heard a lot about this over the last day, about the fact that obviously in Southeast Asia, motorcycle safety is a big issue. In Indonesia, it's even a bigger issue, like a lot of other ASEAN countries. that have about 75% of the fatalities involve powered two-wheelers. And so any design and improvements you need to make at black spots definitely need to look at these road users. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a wee bit today about the different infrastructure measures that are used to try and address those crash black spots and address the powered two-wheeler safety issues. So the first two there, the pavement quality and consistency and roadside barrier design, there's actually quite a lot of guidance around, and particularly guidelines, and I'd recommend the Transport for London guide in terms of what you should be looking at in terms of poor pavement quality and how you should be designing your barrier systems to be safe for, safe as they can be for powered two-wheelers. So I'm not going to talk a lot more about those two. Now in Indonesia, the two key treatments that they actually use to try and address these black spots currently are shoulder widening or widening the road to better accommodate powered two-wheelers and to put in median islands, particularly on 4+ lane roads. So I'll talk a wee bit about those. A couple of the measures they're not using as much as they could be, although in terms of intersection facilities, they are actually trialling quite a lot currently in terms of advanced stop line bike boxes. But I'll talk about that in motorcycle lanes and the research around that. And then I'll finish off talking about the whole area of speed management and how we can reduce speeds involving powered two-wheelers. Next slide, please. So at the moment, we're currently looking at black spots in Bali. There are 60 black spots, and at the top 15 of those, these are some of the sites on the screen. Generally, the roads are quite narrow, they've got no shoulder, and there's very little accommodation of powered two-wheelers. So some of the issues are such that when drivers are trying to overtake these powered two-wheelers, they end up crossing the centre line, which can create a risk in terms of head-on crashes. And if a motorcyclist is overtaking, which they often are on these roads, the vehicle coming the other direction doesn't have a shoulder that they can pull over to perhaps avoid a collision with. And it's particularly an issue on curves. So a lot of the treatments we're looking at in Bali in particular are looking at how we can widen the road and create a bit more space. And that's a fairly common treatment that has been used in the past in Indonesia to address black spots. Next slide, please. The other thing they're doing a lot of is, particularly in Denpasar here in Bali, is putting in medians to reduce the amount of motorcyclists that are overtaking on these roads. So there's all sorts of different median types they're using, and some of them are quite narrow because some of the roads are quite narrow, so to fit in a median. But the issue with these medians, of course, is the fact that you're stopping the right turns, but the motorcyclists still need to access those properties. So one of the issues they haven't really looked at very carefully is U-turning slots and ability for the U-turning of the motorcycles on these very narrow medians. And it's even worse, obviously, for cars that have to U-turn. It's very difficult because there's just not the space with the narrow medians. And the other issue, of course, is that in a lot of these areas, there's a lot of pedestrians crossing the road. And so the median has to be a certain width to make it safe. But pedestrians will still try and cross even on these narrow medians, putting them in harm's way. So we know these are effective, both the widening of the road, adding shoulders, and putting these medians in, and they have been well used across Indonesia as black spot treatments. Next slide, thanks. So obviously another area, and this is not in widespread use in Indonesia, but they have trialled it in some places, is the use of motorcycle lanes. And we do know from the research, particularly the exclusive motorcycle lanes with very few accesses and intersections across them, that they can be quite effective. There's lots of different types of treatments, including full barrier type of treatments, just other separators that are not barrier type, but still separate the motorcyclists from the general traffic through to your full separation along motorways and such like as you have in Malaysia. And when these are fully exclusive, then you can get quite good safety benefits. This is one area where we do have some quite good before and after research indicating that you can get up to a 40% reduction in motorcycle crashes. But generally, in a lot of these facilities, we don't have very good before and after information. So there is a lot of information in the literature, but not necessarily a lot about how effective these types of facilities are in different environments. So where there are a few access ways and intersections, you can get those big benefits. Where where there are a lot of access ways, a bit like bicycle lanes, which I'm more familiar with in New Zealand, we can end up with lots of crashes. In some cases, they can actually have more crashes than not having the facility. And it's because of the fact that vehicles have to turn across these access ways to enter them and side roads. So that's a issue with these exclusive motorcycle lanes. Next slide. So the other type of motorcycle lane are the inclusive lanes, which are more commonly used in Indonesia than the separated ones because their corridors are quite narrow and it's very difficult to actually accommodate the separated motorcycle lanes. Again, there is some research that indicates that these type of facilities can reduce the number of powered two-wheeler crashes, but there are also circumstances where, because of the number of access ways again, and the fact that vehicles are impinging into those facilities at times to undertake or manoeuvre around other vehicles, that they are not as safe as you want them to be. And this is where I see there needs to be a lot more research in terms of where you should avoid using those facilities, because you might actually end up with more crashes by putting those type of facilities in. And so there needs to be more before and after studies in different road environments to look at these things. Next slide. So the other issue when you're thinking about powered two-wheelers, and it's interesting looking at the research, the slower moving powered two-wheelers and the faster moving two-wheelers are the ones that tend to have the most crashes. That's what the literature indicates. So the slow moving motorcyclists, obviously the vehicles sometimes have to want to overtake those slow movers, and if there's not enough room or there's no good facility put into place, like a motorcycle lane or a shoulder, then they have to overtake often across the centre line, which creates a head-on type of risk. The reason why the higher speed motorcyclists tend to have more crashes is because they do tend to overtake a lot because they're overtaking the other vehicles on the road. So in terms of facilities, obviously the priority is to look at those curbside motorcycle lanes first, the slower movers, but in some cases there may be a need to also cater for those faster moving motorcyclists. And where the facilities are provided, like that left-hand photo there, obviously that motorcyclist should probably be further to the left if cars are having to actually undertake it, because that will create issues if there are motorcyclists in that motorcycle lane. So having facilities and educating powered two-wheeler riders where they should be on the road is really important. Next slide. So obviously the traditional approach is to just put the motorcycle lanes on next to the sidewalk or the curb side, and this is commonly used in a number of countries in the region, and I think is suitable in environments where you have 30 to 40% motorcycles. But in Indonesia, we're talking about 70, 80% powered two-wheelers on a lot of these roads. And so if we put the next slide up, there may be some case where you need to actually have motorcycle lanes also in the centre for the faster moving vehicles. And interestingly, what came up yesterday was the fact that in these locations where there's lots of motorcyclists, we should be thinking about not motorcycle lanes, but lanes for the other vehicles. And so this is kind of that type of concept. You've got a lane that if you've got the room that the cars drive in, you've got room either side for the motorcyclists, both the slow moving and the fast moving, and the motorcyclists also use the vehicle lane. But when you've got a lot of them, then potentially there's a need to do this to reduce the risk of crashes involving those faster moving motorcycles. But obviously you need to put a median in to do that. And you see this already in terms of the behaviour of motorcyclists. Just looking here in Philippines, some motorcyclists are actually lane splitting in the right next to the median in the middle of the road, and some are using the sometimes bicycle lane on the next to the sidewalk. So where there are lots of them, I suggest that this design should be looked at, but I haven't been able to find any examples of anyone who's tried this. Next slide. So of course, the other big risk area, or the highest risk area for motorcycles, as it is with all vehicles, is at intersections. And where there are a lot of motorcyclists, we know that they like to filter to the front of the intersection. And there's a couple of issues with that. One, on the right bottom there, the motorcyclists actually sit across the pedestrian crossing facilities that create risks for the crossing pedestrians. And so that makes it very intimidating for people to cross the road if the motorcyclists are using the zebra crossing there to stop and wait in front of the other vehicles. And even when the green man is operating, the motorcyclists are still filtering through and entering into that area. So it is quite a risky type of behaviour if you're a pedestrian trying to cross the road. The other issue is motorcyclists that are straddling the centre line and in really busy intersections, stacking into the opposing lane, creating that head-on risk. Next slide, thanks. So this is a recent study that was done in Indonesia, just published 2 weeks ago, has evaluated a whole lot of these bike boxes across Indonesia. There are 21 cities that have had these bike boxes trialled in them with different type of configuration. Now, the photo up on the right was one of the first bike boxes used in Indonesia around about 2007 in Bandung. Obviously, it's probably not good practice, doesn't have a stop line, and there's no actual marked crosswalk through there. So not best practice, but just an initial trial. What is good practice about that design is the median, stopping the motorcyclists from stacking along the centre line and into the opposing lane. But what they have trialled there is just bike boxes by themselves. In image B, you can see with a motorcycle lane, and that tends to improve the utilisation of the bike boxes. And also in the bottom right, you can see that they've trialled the countdown. So now, in terms of the research, not in every situation, but in a lot of situations, the bike box has been shown to be effective in reducing the number of potential or near misses or conflicts. And so then what you read from that is that they're probably effective in reducing the number of crashes, and also that the motorcycle lanes have some benefit in these types of situations. What's probably less known, and this study didn't actually look at the safety, but is the effect of these countdowns. Now, these countdowns count down to the green and count down to the red. I don't have an issue with the countdown to the red, which is the traditional use of countdown type of signals, because that's letting the powered two-wheeler and the drivers know that the light's about to change. There's a bit of an issue if it's countdown to the green, that it creates a racetrack type of environment where the drivers just accelerate away and you can have potential risk of red light running crashes. But that type of treatment is being evaluated. And while they didn't look at safety directly, they found that use of the countdown signals actually reduced the number of red light runners that were occurring at these intersections. So that's actually site is from Bali. Next slide, thanks. So in terms of speed management for powered two-wheelers, I think this is an area where we need a lot more research and understanding, because we know that roundabouts are good for four-wheeled vehicles and can be safe for powered two vehicles, but they have to be designed very well. If you design them wrong, they can create a lot of crashes. In terms of other facilities like speed bumps and narrowing, again, sometimes they're effective for powered two-wheelers, sometimes they can actually increase crashes, and then in some cases they are beneficial. And I think there's going to be a talk later on about the fact that in some instances they actually do increase crashes. But the whole key thing here is we're trying to reduce those speeds down to ideally below 30, and then we'll reduce all serious and fatal crashes. or as Johan said, at least below 50 kilometres an hour, will reduce the number of deaths. But we still need to learn a lot more about how we actually manage powered two-wheelers using road design. Next slide, thanks. So one of the things they have done in Indonesia is they did have a lot of trouble with their roundabouts. So most of their roundabouts have actually signalised, and most of these ones that we've looked at, they do have quite a lot of crashes, but they don't have a lot of serious or fatal crashes. They tend to be of lower severity, and of course under a safe system, we're okay with that as long as we don't have death and serious injury. In terms of road narrowing, the example here was done by Bloomberg in Bandung as the treatment was applied. This can be very effective in slowing down vehicles, but you still have to be really careful with those designs that it doesn't squeeze motorcyclists and cause crashes. So that can be quite effective. And we really don't know in terms of platforms, where the platforms are too steep, then you can end up with more crashes. Where they're too flat, maybe they're not effective in actually slowing down powered two-wheelers. So we need to understand a bit more about platforms. And of course, where there's also narrowing of the road as part of the platforms, that can create a hazard for motorcyclists, that localised widening. So again, another area we need to find out a lot more and trial these types of treatments and look at their effectiveness. Next slide. So as I said early on, the limitation here is that we don't have a lot of before and after studies, crash studies of the effect of a lot of these treatments. We had them in some environments, but not in all road environments. And we need to do more evaluation. Now, doing evaluations of crashes does often require quite a few years of after data, before and after data, to do those evaluations, and it's quite difficult if you're only trialling a few sites. So what I recommend is that you look at doing traffic conflict studies using video analytics, where you can actually look at the number of near misses before and after you put the treatment in. And if you're reducing the number of traffic conflicts or near misses, you're probably improving safety, and there's growing research that links those conflicts with crashes. And so with some of the smart technology that's available, being able to track vehicles, see how close they get in space and time, you can do this by mounting a video camera before and after, and collecting information about how many conflicts or near misses you got in the before and after situation. So they're a very effective way of evaluating treatments, and something that Binamarga in Indonesia is looking at doing potentially at their Bali black spot sites, looking at how effective the treatments are so that we can learn more about what treatments are most effective. Next slide. So the using various smart technologies that are available, looking at this video analytical data, you can actually have a look and do heat maps where you're getting a lot of the conflicts occurring in your intersection or along your link, and that can tell you initially where your problems are, and then you can see after whether you've got a reduction in these near misses occurring as a result of the treatment that you've put in. Next slide. But I think one thing that these current tools don't do, and there's a number of people who do this type of evaluation, is they don't separate the conflicts between two vehicles that can easily see each other and the conflicts that occur in blind spots. So obviously, what's of greater concern is where we've got near misses occurring where the truck driver or the vehicle driver can't actually see the motorcyclist because it's a blind spot. So that's particularly where we want to see a reduction in the number of traffic conflicts, because in those circumstances, based on a whole lot of conflicts occurring every so often, a crash will actually occur. So that's what they need to develop in the technology, I think, to make the tools even more useful and us understanding how effective the various treatments are. I think that's me finished. Thank you, everyone. And I think I'm handing on to Maricel, that's right, from the Global Road Safety Funds.
All right. So I'm going to have a difficult task here because I'm going to try to do the link and connect some dots between basically the evidence that we've seen, financing, stakeholder engagement, multi-stakeholder support, etc. So I'm trying to do my best that I can connecting those dots. And I want to start, next slide, please. I want to start by sharing a specific project within the World Bank that is the Vietnam Central Highlands Connectivity Improvement Project. It's a project in Vietnam which focuses on connectivity, safety, climate resilience in a specific national highway, which is National Highway 19. If some of you know Vietnam, it's a very, very important national highway. And therefore, it's a great project, but obviously it's a very challenging project. Now, within that financing from the World Bank, we had some grant support within Global Road Safety Facility, supported also by Bloomberg Philanthropies project. And within that support that we had, we basically supported the road safety assessments for the National Highway 19, along with IRAP. And we had some mentoring and capacity building, focus on safe system and infrastructure, safety at roadworks, and we're still working on that part as the road improvements are currently being constructed, and review some improvements for a two-wheeler lane standard guideline, which I'm going to talk at the end of the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, here you're going to just have a summary of the assessment. As you can roughly see, you will see that most of the road is graded less than 3-star or better. And this is the length of the road is 255 kilometers that were assessed. And we did a special focus on speed, and especially around safety, social infrastructure like schools, and where speed was a very crucial factor, and around motorcyclists. If we go to the next slide, please. And here I'm going to do a quick stop just to share with you the importance of this multi-stakeholder engagement that I was talking to you about at the beginning, and the importance on doing a citizen survey. And here I want to do also a parenthesis, because all World Bank projects have a citizen engagement or a community engagement survey and support. So all communities being benefited or affected in some way, they're always kind of being surveyed and involved in the project. However, this does, the difference with this citizen engagement study that I will briefly tell you the story about it, focuses only on road safety. And that's where the difference lies, okay? And we found that it was amazing, because it really, on one side, justify and give us much more tools and strength to all the road safety activities that we were doing in the project, but also share that information with the actual users and community living and working around the National Highway 19. So, just for those of you that do not know much about Vietnam, you might know that, or you should know that Vietnam has more than 90% of the road users being motorcyclists, and more than 2/3 of the road crashes in Vietnam involves a motorcycle. So the objectives of this study was to actually know the road safety knowledge, attitude, and behavior of motorcyclists living and or working in these sections that we selected. These sections that were selected were either 1 or 2-star rated, and they were very crowded areas around schools. We wanted to identify also some of the concerns and the perceptions of safety from these motorcyclists, and also to assess some of the opinions and or proposals that they will have by themselves about how could that infrastructure be improved for their own safety. And what we found is that, at the beginning, and by the way, I need to mention that this was done during COVID, so it added much more challenges. Most of the in-depth interviews had to do online. We had focus groups as well, and still we had very interesting responses. If we go to the next slide, please. We also try to have different areas, not only in terms of districts and communes, but also representative of different types of terrain. Some of the issues and concerns raised by the community were that 46% of surveyed motorcyclists reported experiencing road crash in the National Highway 19. And among 181, we had 391, by the way, participants. And so 31% pointed out that the crash happened due to poor and road conditions. So they really highlighted that many of these road crashes that either they experience or they know about, they were somehow linked to the poor road conditions. And only 9% of these motorcyclists felt safe in the National Highway 19. Another important thing that I should mention is that this is going to be a baseline, and we are planning to actually repeat this study once the infrastructure improvements are finalized in the highway. So hopefully we will see some difference in the perception of safety and also in the numbers of the actual involvement that they have. So some of the, just to finish with this study, because it really gave us a lot of light, some of the road infrastructure measures that they highlighted was lack of signs in all different types, lack of infrastructure support for pedestrians, no motorized vehicles and motorcycles, potholes, poor quality intersections, lack of barriers, poor lighting, which was already mentioned before, and degraded drainage. If we go to the next slide, please. And with this, I'm going to finish with some of the recommendations that these users actually presented to us. By the way, they were also presented with some of the plans of the project. And most of them agreed that they were good ideas and that they thought they could improve their safety at the road. They recommended to have separate lanes, to have upgraded sections, bends, slopes. There was speed was a controversial area where some motorcyclists said that they were willing and they thought that speed should be reduced, where others obviously wanted to have a better road in such a way that they could arrive earlier to their daily needs. But still, most of them asked for deployment of speed calming measures and modifying some attributes related to not motorized vulnerable users. I mean, the good news, and if we go to the next slide, is that many of these things that they were asking are included in the project. And one thing I forgot to mention is that the assessments, although were carried by the grant, the recommendations of the assessments are going to be carried out by the financing project. So that's part of the where we have the link between the grants and the financing. Now I'm going to just focus on the other kind of task that we had under this project, which is upgrading from the safety perspective a design manual for exclusive roads and lanes. And I mentioned roads and not only lanes, because specifically as it was mentioned, I think yesterday, when we have such a large amount of the fleet being motorcycles, we need to think also of exclusive roads, not only exclusive lanes. And so this manual, and this is where I'm trying to also make the link between the theory and actually the practice, and as Sean was mentioning, the need for guidance within countries and leadership on actually making this evidence actually being implemented in the real world. And this is where this manual that already Vietnam was planning to implement it, we supported them in upgrading it from the safety perspective. We had comments from WRI, from IRA, from FIA, from the World Bank, Freight Engineering, and so forth. So it was a very comprehensive review. If we go to the next slide, please. Some of the principles for upgrading the manual focus on the literature review, but also experts consultation at a national and international level. And some of the focus of the safety specifications for improving the manual are listed here. They include lane design, speed, rumble strip, the technical standards, guideposts, roundabouts, intersections, etc., 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 all really looking into the local context of Vietnam. And here it's just a summary of the key points and improvements that were done, which are all, I knew I didn't have time to go into detail in all of these points, but I still added them in the presentation. I'm going to try to just run through them, but I still wanted to add them because I know you're going to have access to the presentation in case you want to review it later on. But some of these key points and improvements go on the traffic organization, the traffic safety system, how can they actually use the IRAP assessment to improve the actual infrastructure design and use, considering the guide, but also once they implement it. Geometric design, classification of roads and lanes for the two-wheelers, and the sustainable transport development. Now, it's important in this sustainable transport and motorcycle safety issues to consider, again, the context. So we're talking about in Vietnam, in the last decade, the motorcyclists double. Just in one decade, they just double, and it's the pronostics are looking that it's going to continue following that trend. We also know in 2020 that there were 670 motorcycles per 1,000 population compared to 44 automobiles. So you can really see the kind of the difference in the fleet. We also know that by 2030, it's looking that around 70% of the population still going to prefer motorcyclists as their daily travel. And therefore, we also used what Vietnam already had, which is this 4-pillar strategy for motorcycle safety, which includes from policy and regulation, infrastructure, which basically is the how and the what, awareness and education and training, and the technology advances. Now, when we go into details, and again, I'm just going to run through these slides, we basically had to really go into detail on the classification of the roads and lanes, considering the number of lanes, considering the speed, considering the mixture of different vehicles, and then based on that classification, then propose the right kind of measure for this motorcycle lane or exclusive road. So again, it was a very exhaustive review regarding classification, regarding the vehicle mixture and the speed. Going to the geometric design, we went into horizontal alignment. We went also into vertical alignment, and what are the best practices, again, internationally, but also locally, considering the conditions and the reality. We went into the cross-section, and considering the minimum width, the traffic volume, and the number of lanes, as I was saying, and what's the minimum required space for a safe operation of the two-wheelers. The traffic separators, we also went into the detail of where was it safer to use a delineator or a soft separator or a hard separator, based again on the classification of the roads and the mixture of the different users. We went into the night visibility, with we have already been mentioned the importance on this topic. We went into going into the principles of urban roads and national highways, because we know it's not the same risk. Some of the national highways actually go through some rural parts, and that was also considered. It was considered the safety, the capacity, the delays in the intersections, the efficiency, data collection and analysis that was available. And these are just highlighting some of the methods that are included in the guideline for urban roads, and then also for national highways, as I was mentioning. As you can see here, there's a clear difference between the lane separation for two-wheelers lanes and for three two-wheeler lanes. Then we had also the methods for bus stops. The good news is that we found, at least using National Highway 19 as well, that 60% of the bus stops only require relocation without expansion. So that would actually support the implementation of these safety recommendations, as they will make them cheaper and more easy to actually be able to implement it. We went into the methods for intersections, again looking into safety and capacity, the structures, and signs on the surface, on the lane segregation, the different kind of signs that needs to be aligned, and what was the more recommended as well for the type of lane and or road. And the use of the ARA methodology, considering some of the limits that it may have, but also some of the improvements that they already explained to us. And here there are just some examples of the IRAP assessment that we did on the National Highway 19, where we can see some facilities of two-wheelers with a 2-star rating or less, and a class 1 grade A with 4 or 3 stars or better. So obviously you can see a big difference there. Here there is another example, also looking into the soft separators and the hard separators in a class 2 grade C motorcycle lane. Here you can see the difference between a grade separator intersection and or overpass and underpass, and at grade intersection that are 3-star or better. And just concluding and the ways forward. And again, I'm sorry I needed to rush through those slides, but I knew we didn't have time, but still wanted you to know what's kind of inside of the guidelines. So this upgraded manual, it was done with the idea of really help Vietnam government to really study, plan, design, and audit and implement this exclusive roads and lanes, from not only the efficiency part, but particularly on the safety aspects. And I forgot to mention, actually, when we were talking about two-wheeler, we're not only talking about motorized two-wheeler. So yes, motorized two-wheeler was the focus because first of the large fleet, but we also consider bicycles. Although, and I must say that this guideline is actually being supported or complemented by another guideline specific for bicycles that was developed with the support of WRI. So although this goes into little detail of the two-wheelers in general and focuses on motorized two-wheelers, it's complemented by that other guide. So these solutions are recommended throughout the guideline to be piloted and assessed and adjusted as the manual or the guideline is rolled out in a progressive way. And again, it's important to consider how can the IRAP methodology can be adapted and used in this context. And Greg already gave us kind of an overview of that. And the news is that this upgraded manual is already in the hands of the Vietnam authorities in Vietnamese and in English. And they're currently reviewing it. And we're hoping that they will soon approve it, publish it, and hopefully the whole manual or parts of it will actually become a standard for the Vietnamese government. So that's actually how we go through from the theory to the practice and to the action. And so we are very excited about this. And now we are obviously in the last stretch where we need to see that action happening. If we go to the next slide, and here I'm just finishing with upcoming opportunities for Vietnam, just to share with you that there is another couple of projects coming. One that it's a 3 national highway, and another one that it's in the Mekong area, and another 5 national highways in the central and north area. And the idea of these projects is to also include, based on the activities and based on the experience from the project that I briefly presented to you, also take the opportunities to include in these new 2 projects the same. Right? Work along with the provinces that are involved in these joint actions and consider the motorcyclist safety and all the vulnerable users, speed management, and the road hazards and safe intersections. Thank you very much. Sorry. And now I'm passing to my colleague Eduardo Pompeo, who is actually going to hopefully also blow our mind with new areas and new strategies on how can we continue protecting vulnerable users and to motorized wheelers.
Thank you, Marcela. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting us and for having us here today. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the responses to the challenges posed by growing motorcycling use from the perspective of street design. So just to clarify about the context we work with at GDCI, we're talking about urban streets. So we're not talking about intercity connections and rural roads or ex-urban contexts. We're talking about urban streets. And we understand that urban streets, they are the platform, of course, for mobility, for people to move, but also are places where you can meet our friends, to be outside, to enjoy, for kids to play, to learn how to ride a bike. Streets can be spaces to relax, and they can also be spaces to spend time with old friends or to meet new ones. They are fundamentally public spaces, and they serve many functions that will relate a lot to the goal of integrating the SDGs when we approach road safety. So the decisions that we make on how we design our streets will have an impact on mobility and access, of course, in cities, but also in the environmental and economic sustainability, in livability, quality of life, and of course, as we know, public health and safety. So when we think about these streets that form our largest network of continuous public spaces in our cities, we must make a better use of this valuable space. For many years, we have been considering only one user in isolation when we make those design decisions. And we have been applying highway codes to urban streets that are resulting so all the priority has been given to make those environments more convenient and attractive for people inside a car, but designing out everyone else. Any considerations for other vulnerable road users came as an afterthought. So if you are someone taking transit on a street, riding a motorbike, in a bicycle, or even daily, simple things like crossing a street or taking the kids to school, those activities, daily activities, became a death threat. So, of course, we're here today to discuss what are the implications of the increase in motorcycling use and the rise in fatalities and injuries in our cities. And there's a lot that can be done, we are discussing in this session, but I wanted to focus that when we talk about infrastructure or when we talk about street design, we should acknowledge that the street is a single, unique space where multiple users interact. So when we address street design and infrastructure, we have now the opportunity to avoid repeating some of the mistakes from the past, of considering only one user in isolation to considering all users and how we make our cities safe for all of them. So we at the Global Designing Cities Initiative, for those who are unfamiliar, we are a nonprofit organization based in New York City. And when our program was launched, our first mission under the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety was to develop a global street design guide based on the guidelines from NACTO in the US, but adapted to a global context, learning from the expertise of on-the-ground practitioners from different regions of the world, with the basic premise of inverting priorities in infrastructure investments and putting people first on street design. The guide also brings very ambitious yet practical examples of how we can transform our existing streets to become safer, more sustainable, more resilient, and ultimately better places for our city dwellers. The guide also brings guidelines for each of the 6 road users that are defined and think about them like in integration, right? So as many here today, the safety of power two-wheelers or motorcyclists is a new topic of research, and we are far from having all the responses here, but we are excited to dialogue and try to formulate at least the right questions and how we should go about it. So what is specific about motorcyclists? Of course, they are highly vulnerable, as we've been discussing, but they are kind of like a unique vulnerable road user, as they are at the same time at high risk themselves, but they also pose risks to others. So when we think about the lack of physical protection, of course, they are very exposed and vulnerable. But when you think about interaction between vulnerable road users, cyclists and pedestrians, because of the low mass and speed differential, they pose minimal risk to each other. But motorcyclists, they have medium mass and they can reach high speeds. So they pose a risk also to other vulnerable road users. And this is important for infrastructure. Just to illustrate that, in the city of Bogota in Colombia, motorcycles are the leading cause of death for pedestrians. They cause 1/3 of every pedestrian fatality in the city. They're involved causing or participating in 27% of all road traffic fatalities, despite a mode share of only 5.5% of all the trips. So in cities at high speeds, motorcycling is inherently unsafe in urban areas in the model we have today. So what does the rapid growth and danger posed by motorcycles mean for the physical design of streets? How can we discuss what are the measures that we need to take for the future to address the current challenges? But also when we think about the lifespan of infrastructure investments, we have to think 15 years from now, 20 years from now, what is the future we are envisioning with these decisions? And then, of course, discuss very specifically if the implementation of dedicated motorcycle facilities is the right design response in cities. So I'm proposing 3 main ideas here that I will discuss. Starting the first one, are motorcycling facilities proven to make our streets safe for all users? So we are seeing, very in line with what Shane presented, we are seeing mixed results. So in motorways, there are positive trends. But when it comes to cities, we see mixed results. This example from São Paulo in Brazil, where a motorcycle lane was implemented, the safety outcomes were actually very negative. There was a high increase in injury crashes. And after 7 years trying to fix and adapt the trial, the city decided to remove it. And when they remove it, the crash rates returned to the original state. And also the results for pedestrians were really bad, with a very sharp increase in the number of pedestrian crashes. Advanced stop bars, we also see mixed results. This is a citywide evaluation in the city of Fortaleza in Brazil. So there has been a significant and important reduction in injury crashes, but at the same time, a concerning increase in pedestrian crashes. So how do we evaluate these infrastructures, taking into consideration the safety of all road users, not just motorcyclists in isolation? So we have to look at these facilities, first taking into consideration what is the context they are implemented in. They're inside the city, they're like exurban areas. What are the typologies? Is it a center running lane, like fully protected and physically separated? Is it, like more mixed with traffic? And how do we evaluate the safety of all users, and then understand why it's working or why it's not? Also, a common discussion that appears very frequently and tends to be very anecdotal, we should try to look at the evidence for this, is are wider lane widths better for motorcyclists? Like, one argument is that it's easier to filter through traffic, but at the same time, can narrow lanes also limit speeding opportunities? What is the trade-off? What is the safety outcome of that? Because For everything else, we do recommend narrow travel lanes in cities. Wide travel lanes are associated with higher speeds of traffic and higher crash rates and fatality rates. So what is the impact? One research question that I think is open for further investigation is what is the impact of lane width on motorcyclist speed and safety? And how does it impact safety for all street users, not only motorcyclists? The second point is about how are we using this space? What are the decisions that we are making? The street space is a finite space, the finite resource. What should we be prioritizing to promote safe and sustainable mobility? So we can do a lot by reallocating street space to make safe alternatives to driving and to riding motorcycles convenient and more attractive to bring more users and promote a mode shift. This is also a more efficient way to handle mobility and will have a positive impact in reducing congestion. So how can we reverse the trend of one of the questions related to that, right? We are seeing a lot of motorcyclists coming from transit. So this study in Pune in India is showing that 2/3 of recent motorcyclists were previously using transit, the most efficient and safe mode that we have. So we have to do something to prevent this migration. And one infrastructure response to that will improve safety for motorcyclists is to dedicate space for transit, creating bus lanes that reduce drastically travel time and also increase capacity of our streets. So there are lots of different typologies that we can implement, from the simplest bus lanes to BRTs. But it's really important that we promote a shift to transit. Also, another frequent question that we are asked is like, why should we not treat cycle and motorcycle facilities equally? We believe we shouldn't do that because we are talking about one sustainable mode and one unsafe and unsustainable mode. So they have different places in the street hierarchy. So when we think about promoting safe cycling facilities, the goal is to attract more people to use a mode that is safer, more sustainable, and that brings multiple public health benefits and livability benefits in our cities. So evidence shows that the more cycle lanes, the more cyclists will ride in the cities, and the overall risk will be low. So the more cycling, fewer fatalities we have. We see the opposite trend for driving. We see that the more driving, the more vehicle kilometers traveled we have in a city, the more fatalities we have. So what does dedicated infrastructure for a motorcycle do in this case? Does it induce a larger use of motorcycles in city? Does it induce demand? And also, are the higher percentages of motorcycle use or VKT also correlated with higher fatality rates for motorcyclists? It's intuitively, it seems that yes, it will lead to an increase, but it's also an open research question, right? Then I think, like, responding a little bit to the provocations that the thought-provoking questions Nam asked in his presentation, how can we capture the benefits of motorcycles but avoid the negative impacts that they have? How can we think about, like, how can we embrace the current situation that we have and think of an adaptation and an evolution of the fleet towards a fleet that has the same benefits of individual, being an individual mode, point-to-point mobility, but but that has the same reach in terms of distances and comfort for the user, right? So we could think about the shift, promoting a shift from motorcycling to bicycles, of course, but also to electric bikes, why not? But then it's really important that we define very well what is the mass, the maximum mass that those vehicles should have, and the maximum speed, so that they can share space with cyclists. And then we can think about, we don't know what we will look like, But the important thing is to get the mass and the speed and the kinetic energy right. So instead of like making investments in infrastructure that may perpetuate an unsustainable mobility system and pattern, why don't we use infrastructure to catalyze a change and a shift to safer and more sustainable modes? Why don't we create prime, very well protected, attractive space for the uses we want to see more in the future, addressing the mobility needs of the people instead of perpetuating and incentivizing unsafe modes. So the last but definitely not least, I know these are all like looking at the future, but looking at the present, what can we do right now? We know what is effective in terms of infrastructure, which is focusing on speeds to make our streets safer for all users. We know speed kills and that lowering speed saves lives. We have evidence from all over the world showing the effectiveness of reducing speed limits combined with the redesign of the streets, with the prioritization of sustainable mobility and automated enforcement. Those have the most significant results in terms of saving lives and preventing injuries. So, of course, we can also do a lot with speed design. The way our environment is defined will shape our behaviors and will lead to safer speeds from motorized vehicles. And the Global Street Design Guide brings a lot of techniques and strategies to lower speed for all vehicles. And what we are seeing as evidence is that the overall speed of traffic is one of the main predictors of higher or lower crash rates for motorcyclists as well. So just summarizing, number one, focus on speeds for all the goals that we have. Reducing the overall speed of traffic will directly improve the safety of motorcyclists and all other users, but consider them. Don't consider only motorcyclists in isolation. We have to evaluate the impact of the decisions that we make on infrastructure and street design for all users. And finally, let's promote a shift to safer modes and have these in the vision of what we are promoting. The street space is finite, and we need to use it wisely to promote a shift from motorcycling to safe and sustainable mobility. Just wanted to conclude by zooming out a little bit and seeing that we are talking a lot about transportation and mobility, and it's really important that we promote more cycling and walking in our cities, but just also like to understand that this is part of larger goals in terms of urban development and the livability of our cities. And we have the tools to look at our cities differently and reimagine the role that they play in our cities and how they will benefit our communities. How can we come together with communities and rethink and reimagine those streets, thinking of the future and thinking of a safer and more sustainable cities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Edu. Great presentation, and thanks to all of our presenters. We're going a little over time, but that's okay. We're going to make up for it with and extend out our break, so don't worry, you're going to get a break in just a moment. But definitely I want to ensure that we capitalize on having our speakers up here and respond to some questions and comments for this panel. Like I mentioned yesterday, we need to be greedy for information, so let's do that, and then we can be greedy for our break following that afterwards. I'm going to start with some of the questions from our online participants. I see more than 100 have joined us online, so again, welcome to you all. So I'll start with a couple from online, but then of course, happy to take one or two from the floor as well. And I'm also just going to combine some of the questions here a little bit together. So Edu, relating actually somewhat to what you were mentioning at the end, but also others had raised in this kind of balance between prioritizing powered two-wheelers, and then the implications for cyclists and also pedestrians. So Judy Fighter from GRSP asked the question about how infrastructure treatments for powered two-wheelers might have implications, positive or negative, for bicycle riders. And then Freddie Holmes from the infrastructure in the Cook Islands adds on to that and also asks about the implications for pedestrians when you are really designing prioritization for powered two-wheelers and how that mix works. Maybe I'll start with you, Edu, and of course, if anyone else would like to join.
Thank you, Blaise. Very, very good questions, and also an opportunity to mention that the impact on walkability of those decisions will also impact the use of transit quite drastically, right? And cycling and walking is key to the first and last mile to access transit. So what I think there are 2 points on this discussion. One is the space is limited and finite in our streets. Like we have existing cities with narrow streets. So many times, like if we decide to create a lane for one user, we are not creating for another one. So what are the priorities that we are taking when we make those decisions? And what is the future we are envisioning and what we are trying to incentivize and what we are trying to discourage? The second point is, I think, pretty much related to what are the conditions for cyclists and power two-wheelers, and then probably we still don't have the term. Is it e-bikes? Is it pedal assist cycles, or like we have electric motorbikes that can go at very high speeds and have very high mass. So defining those emerging vehicles based on their kinetic energy and regulating and allowing certain vehicles to share the spaces with cyclists, and then reducing the speed for motor vehicles in the space that bigger and heavier vehicles will ride is important. So it's a bit of a mix. We can reduce the speed for four-wheelers and have higher speed, higher mass two-wheelers sharing the space with them. And we can have cycling infrastructure with pedal assist and vehicles that bring like also the physical activity benefits of two-wheelers being powered or not powered.
And Edu and panel, also we've had kind of presentations here talking about complete separation of motorcycles or powered two-wheelers, and there's a question here from Lewis Sorienti who asks whether the impact of dedicated motorcycle lanes might increase or decrease depending on which city they're implemented in. What would and also the design itself of those lanes, what impact that might have in relation to the effect of a dedicated motorcycle lane. Does anyone want to jump in there? Greg, I see you taking off your mask. Go ahead.
I think like context is incredibly important here, and like Eduardo said, like understanding what you want, like what is the function and the performance and the style of environment that you want is incredibly important. The evidence shows that where motorcycle lanes have been put in, you do get a reduction in deaths on those roads like Shane talked about. But that's a particular context and usually where the traffic flows are incredibly high and speeds are higher, and these are more like arterial sorts of roads, not like the sorts of street environments that Eduardo is talking about. So I think going into this, like whenever you're thinking about where you are, whether it's a street environment, a rural highway environment, or the kind of bit in between, sort of on that area where you're going from a highway into a city, really understanding what the true performance and function and needs are for that environment is incredibly important. And one of the big challenges I think we see often where areas where highways particularly are being rapidly developed is that the highways end up passing through built up environments. And so they become it's not sort of in a city street environment, but it's very urbanized environment. And you get this big conflict between the desire for a highway function and the need for a community function. And that's one of the areas where I think it's incredibly important to be very realistic about the situation, not theoretical about what the function of the road is. It's okay for it to be called a highway, but in reality, it's going to become a community area that goes through the town. And in that environment, in that community area, yeah, a motorcycle lane may be completely inappropriate because, like Eduardo said, that is associated with the higher speed flow. So the design of the road needs to be very context specific, and the design of the road really needs to change as it flows from these different environments as well. So yeah, it's really fit for purpose designs is what we really need, I think.
And thank you, Greg. I see as well, I should have mentioned, we do see some of our friends online here, so please feel free to turn on your video if you'd like. It's great to see some of you there. And I'm actually going to go to one more question from online and then I'll open up to the floor here because, Greg, you just mentioned that issue around transition between urban or rural areas, and there's a question here from Becky Bavinger from Bloomberg Philanthropies, who asks about this transition space. There she is. Hi, Becky. So she mentions that they're advocating for 30 kilometres an hour in urban areas, but what about arterial roads or federal highways that then come into cities? Can any of the panel comment on how to accommodate and manage speeds on those roads, as they are often shown to be high burden, but they might also be governed by different authorities from those in the urban areas? So again, opening up. Yeah, Maricela, go ahead.
Yes, so exactly as I was trying to convey also in the guideline for Vietnam, it's very important to do that classification of roads, right? And when I was saying the classification of roads include the different mixes and masses and dimensions of the vehicles, the number of lanes, and the speed. So that normally or should be considering when it's going through one area to another area, and when it's completely separated, or where you actually do kind of restrict pedestrians into getting into highway, for example, or where you're crossing these built-up areas where, yes, they might not be cities, or officially they might not be cities, but extra-officially, you know that there is a lot of very active vulnerable users. And that's why in this citizen survey that we did with FIA Foundation and with AIP Foundation and with IRAP, we wanted also to get the sense not only from the technical part of the roads and these built-up areas, but actually from the users. And as I mentioned, these users included people working and living in the area. So, and what we basically saw is exactly what we're discussing and what Becky's raising, the importance of considering the people not only living in the area, but also working in the area, as I was saying, and the needs for them to, and as I was saying, that's why we had contradictory messages from these users, right? Those that are just passing by, that they just want to go, faster and with no stop, and those living there, which were the ones more advocating for lower speeds. So just making a summary of this response, we need to be very careful in really considering these technicalities of the actual infrastructure, but also that those needs from those users, and then make the right decision on how this investment should be done and the guidelines that they should follow. And of course, this should be, as I was mentioning, be coordinated between the different entities involved, right? The Ministry of Transport, the provinces, as I was saying, or the municipal level, that they all should be involved in this kind of projects, not only the national counterpart. Thank you.
20 seconds, Greg.
Blaise, if I can, I mean, one of the really important additions to the new, or this decade's global plan for the Decade of Action is the introduction of the land use planning as a critical part of the road safety mix. And I think, like with highways, it's really important to recognize that their character changes over time. Like where populations are growing, these highways can become communities in a matter of years as populations grow. So we need to be quite dynamic in constantly understanding the true context of the road. It may be classified as a national highway, for example, but over time, in reality, it might become a community road because the community has evolved around it. And so one of the very practical challenges that we have is that the engineers in the National Highway Authority will say, perhaps, it's a national highway, we can't put the speed limit to 30 because that's the rules. So that's kind of a theoretical framework mismatching with a practical situation. And so that dynamic sort of constant review and constant recognition of what the true character of the road is, whether it's by design or it's organically sort of growing, needs to be taken into account. And so it's not just sort of set and forget in terms of road design. You constantly have to be revisiting and understanding the context.
Thanks, Greg. I'm aware the people here will have a chance to grab these people at our break, but is there anything burning in someone's mind? Yes, please, sir. Sorry, do you want to just make your way to the microphone here? Yeah.
This is a question for Mr. Johan Strandroth. You presented a slide which seemed to me to differentiate between linear impacts at 30 kilometers per hour compared to those above 30 kilometers per hour. If I'm correct, I would like to understand what happens if the linear impact exceeds 30 kilometers per hour and how objective it would be to think that impacts above 30 kilometers per hour are usually fatal.
Yeah, so these are risks which are sort of estimated based on real-life evaluation. So you look at real-life crashes, you estimate the speed in which they happen, and then you have a set of maybe 1,000 crashes. Certain proportion becomes fatal, certain is minor, certain is severe, and you look at the speed of that, and then you draw a probability function. So if we talk about 30 kilometers per hour, that would be a 10% risk for a severe injury. And if you go above that, it increases with a certain power function in terms of the risk for a severe injury. So a severe injury would probably be increasing with the power of 2.5, something like that. So increase the speed with 10%, the fatality risk with or the severe injury risk would increase the power of 2.5 of that. So it's really an exponential increase in severity risk when you increase the speed over that 10%. And the same will go for fatalities, but then you'll probably have the 10% with 50 then instead. So 10% risk at 50 kilometers per hour, but then the power would probably be power of 4. So it's even a more exponential risk with fatalities. So that would be sort of, yeah, based on real-life evaluations.
And the very last word, Dave.
Thank you, Blaise. Another question for Johan, I think was relevant to many of our participants. Johan, the analysis that you provided, very impressive. What sort of data is needed if I don't have extensive in-depth data? If I'm from a low-income country, for example, can I still do an analysis like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the better data, the better confidence in the outcomes. But surely we can do pretty much with a police narrative and Google Maps. And that's pretty much what's needed.
Sounds pretty simple. I'll have to leave it there, but please do find the person in the panel during our break here for those in person, because I do want to ensure that we get to the break. For those of you joining online, thank you so much for joining this session. We welcome you back at 1:30 Manila time for the next of our sessions that are being put online, and that will focus on safer users of powered two-wheelers. So thank you so much for all your questions, your comments. I've seen a lot of interaction happening there, and I'm glad we could get to at least a few of those questions for our panel. So we'll see you at 1:30. For those in this room, please, if you could come back next door at 11:20, and we will start the next dialogue. As I mentioned, if you want to grab any of these people to have a quick question in the break, please do so, but we'll be back at 11:20. Finally, a reminder about the draft statement of this event. Again, a reminder, if you have the QR code, you want to make any comment, please do so. And then as we move to the break, please join me in giving a very warm thanks to our panel focusing on redesigning infrastructure.